The bartender's voice cut through the Friday night noise like a knife. "This table's reserved for operators, Grandpa. Maybe try the corner booth." The old man in the faded red jacket just stood there, his weathered hand resting on the back of the empty chair, white beard catching the dim light from the neon signs. Around him, younger men in tactical gear and unit patches laughed into their beers, not even bothering to lower their voices. The disrespect hung in the air thick as smoke. His name was Thomas Reed, and if you passed him on the street, you'd see exactly what everyone in that bar saw. 70 years old, maybe more. White hair, white beard, both needing a trim. That red jacket he wore over a plain t-shirt, both showing their age. His face carried the weight of decades, serious and sad in a way that made people look away. He didn't look like much. He looked like someone time had forgotten. He looked like someone who should know his place. Thomas had been coming to Sullivan's bar for 3 months now, ever since he'd moved into the small apartment 2 blocks away. It wasn't much of a place. Peeling paint on the walls, a radiator that clanged all night, but it was what his pension could afford, and he'd learned long ago not to ask for more than he needed. He kept to himself mostly, morning walks, afternoon at the library. Sometimes on Friday nights he'd come to Sullivan's, not for the company, just to be around people, just to remember what it felt like to be part of something. The bar had changed ownership 6 months back. New owner brought in a new crowd. Younger veterans mostly, guys who'd done tours in Iraq, Afghanistan. They wore their service on their sleeves, literally. Unit patches, tactical watches, boots that still held their shine. They'd claimed the big table near the back, the one under the shadow box with the purple heart and the folded flag. The table Thomas used to sit at back before the new crowd arrived. Now it was their territory and they guarded it like a firebase. Thomas turned to leave, but his foot caught the leg of a chair. He stumbled, caught himself on the table edge. The men erupted in laughter. One of them, couldn't have been more than 30, stood up. His name tape read Morrison. He had the build of someone who spent serious time in the gym, arms thick as tree trunks. Jesus, old timer. You okay there? Maybe you should head home before you break a hip. More laughter. Someone made a joke about adult diapers. Thomas straightened slowly, that sad expression never changing, never showing the words landing like body blows. The bartender, a guy named Kyle, who'd taken over with the new ownership, walked over with a rag in his hand. "Look, sir, I don't want any trouble. There's plenty of other seats. These guys, they're operators. Special forces, SEALs, Rangers. This is kind of their spot, you know? It's respect." Thomas looked at him for a long moment. Those tired eyes holding something Kyle couldn't quite read. Then he nodded once, slowly, and turned toward the door. He almost made it out. His hand was on the brass handle, worn smooth by decades of use, when the door swung open hard. A man in his 50s stepped through, and the energy in the room shifted like someone had flipped a switch. He wore dress blues, the uniform immaculate, ribbons covering his chest in neat rows. The silver eagles on his collar caught the light. Colonel Marcus Webb. He was a legend in the area, commanded the local reserve unit, had 3 combat tours under his belt. Everyone knew him. Everyone respected him. Webb stopped in the doorway, his eyes scanning the room. They landed on Thomas, still standing there with his hand on the door, and something changed in the colonel's face. His jaw went slack, his eyes went wide. The color drained from his cheeks like someone had pulled a plug. Then, in a voice that carried to every corner of that suddenly silent bar, he said, "Sir, not hey, not buddy, sir." The word hung in the air like a thunderclap. Webb's hand snapped up in a salute so crisp it could have been parade ground perfect. Every head in the bar turned. The operators at the table froze, beers halfway to their mouths. Morrison, the big guy who'd been laughing hardest, looked like he'd been slapped. Thomas stood there, that sad, serious expression unchanged, and slowly returned the salute. His movement was economical, precise, the muscle memory of decades. Webb held his salute until Thomas dropped his hand. Then the colonel crossed the distance between them in 3 long strides. He stood at attention. "Sir, I apologize. I didn't know you were in town. If I'd known, I would have arranged proper accommodations." Thomas shook his head slightly. "At ease, Marcus. I'm just here for a quiet drink." The bar had gone completely silent. You could have heard a pin drop on the worn floorboards. Kyle the bartender stood frozen, rag still in hand. The operators sat like statues, Webb turned, his face hardening, and looked at the room. Do you people have any idea who you've been disrespecting? This man, he gestured to Thomas, is Major Thomas Reed, retired. And before any of you were born, before most of your fathers were born, he was doing things that are still classified. Webb's voice carried the weight of command, each word landing like a hammer blow. Major Reed served 3 tours in Vietnam, not as support, not in the rear. He was Military Assistance Command Vietnam Studies and Observations Group. If you know anything about the war, you know what that means. If you don't, let me educate you. MACVSOG had a casualty rate that would make your blood run cold. They ran missions into Cambodia, Laos, North Vietnam, places we weren't supposed to be, doing things we couldn't acknowledge. The most dangerous missions of the entire war. Morrison had gone pale. One of his buddies, a guy with a seal trident on his shirt, slowly stood up. Webb wasn't finished. Major Reed has 3 silver stars, 2 bronze stars with V device, a purple heart with 2 oak leaf clusters. He was shot down twice, spent 4 months evading capture in Laos with a broken leg and a bullet in his shoulder. 4 months. He made it back to friendly lines on his own, walked out of that jungle when everyone had written him off as KIA. The citation for his first silver star is still partially classified because the mission was that sensitive. Thomas stood there, his expression unchanged, that same sad seriousness. He didn't look proud, he didn't look vindicated, he just looked tired. Marcus, that was a long time ago. Webb shook his head. No, sir, it wasn't. Not for those of us who know. Not for those of us who understand what you did, what you sacrificed. He turned back to the room. After Vietnam, Major Reed helped establish training protocols we still use today. He consulted on operations in Grenada, Panama. He trained the men who trained the men sitting at that table, and he did it all quietly, without fanfare, without asking for recognition. Kyle the bartender looked like he wanted to sink through the floor. The rag fell from his hand. Sir, I didn't know. I'm so sorry. Thomas finally moved, stepping away from the door. He walked slowly, that slight hitch in his step that came from the old wounds, toward the table where the operators sat. They scrambled to their feet, chairs scraping loud in the silence. Morrison's face had gone from pale to red, shame written across his features. Thomas stopped at the table, looked at each of them in turn. When he spoke, his voice was quiet, rough with age and emotion. I don't blame you, boys. You didn't know. Nobody knows anymore. That's how it was supposed to be. We did what needed doing and we didn't talk about it. That was the deal. He reached into his jacket, pulled out a worn leather wallet. From it, he extracted a card, laminated but yellowed with age. He set it on the table. It was a MACV-SOG identification card. The photo showed a young man, dark hair, clean-shaven, eyes hard as flint. But you could see it was him. That same serious expression, even then, even in his 20s. The card was stamped with classifications, unit designations that most people wouldn't recognize. Morrison picked it up with shaking hands, looked at it, then at Thomas, then back at the card. Oh, God. Sir, we had no right. Thomas held up a hand. You earned your place at this table. You served. You fought. You bled. That matters. Don't let anyone tell you it doesn't. But remember something. He tapped the table with one finger. There's always someone who came before, always someone who walked through fire you can't imagine. And most of them, you'll never know their names. They'll never ask for recognition. They'll just be old men in faded jackets trying to have a quiet drink. Webb stepped forward, his voice firm. Sir, please, take the table. These men will find other seats. They'll be honored to give it up. Thomas shook his head. That's not necessary. I just came for a beer. I'll sit at the bar. But Morrison was already moving, pulling out a chair. No, sir. Please, we insist. It would be our honor. The other operators nodded, murmuring agreement. One of them, the guy with the seal trident, extended his hand. I'm sorry, sir. Truly, we should have known better than to judge. Thomas took his hand, shook it firmly. You couldn't have known. But now you do. And maybe next time you see an old man in a worn jacket, you'll remember. Maybe you'll wonder what stories he's carrying, what he's lived through, what he's survived. Kyle appeared at the table, a beer in his hand, the good stuff from the top shelf. On the house, sir, for life. I'm so sorry. Thomas accepted the beer, lowered himself carefully into the chair. The men who'd been sitting there gathered their drinks, moved to other tables, not sulking, not angry, subdued, thoughtful. Morrison lingered for a moment. Sir, can I ask, why didn't you say something? Why didn't you tell us? Thomas took a sip of his beer, looked up at the young operator. Because I shouldn't have to. The uniform, the service, that's not a weapon to use against people. It's not a card to play for special treatment. I did my job. I came home. I lived my life. That's enough. Webb pulled up a chair, sat down across from Thomas. The colonel's eyes were bright, emotional. Sir, I heard stories about you at the War College. They used your missions as case studies. We studied your tactics, your decisions. You saved lives, sir. Hundreds of them, maybe thousands. The intelligence you gathered, the operations you ran, they changed the course of engagements. Thomas stared into his beer. I lost men, Marcus. Good men, boys, really. 18, 19 years old. I remember every name, every face. That's what I carry. Not the medals, not the commendations, the names. The bar slowly came back to life, but it was different now. Quieter, more respectful. People kept glancing over at the table where Thomas sat with Colonel Webb. The operators, who'd been so loud before, spoke in hushed tones, their earlier bravado gone. Morrison came back to the table, another beer in his hand. Sir, can I buy you this? Thomas looked up at him, that sad expression softening just slightly. Son, you already gave me something more valuable than a beer. You listened, you learned. That's all an old soldier can ask for. As the night wore on, others approached, veterans from different eras, different branches. They'd heard the story, heard who Thomas was. They came to shake his hand, to say thank you, to just be in the presence of history. Thomas accepted it all with quiet grace, never boasting, never embellishing. When people asked about the missions, the combat, he'd deflect, talk about the men he served with, the helicopter pilots who flew into hell to extract them, the radio operators who kept them connected, the medics who saved lives under fire, always others, never himself. Near closing time, Morrison approached one final time. He had something in his hand. Sir, I want you to have this. It was his unit patch, the one from his deployment. Special Forces. Thomas shook his head. That's yours. You earned it. Morrison's voice cracked slightly. Sir, I was so far out of line tonight. I judged you. I disrespected you. I need to make it right somehow. Thomas reached out, put a hand on the younger man's shoulder. You make it right by remembering, by being better, by teaching the next generation to look deeper, to see further. That's how you honor the past. Not with patches or apologies, with actions, with character. Webb walked Thomas out when the bar finally closed. The street was quiet, empty except for a few parked cars. The colonel stood at attention one more time. Sir, it was an honor. Thomas returned the salute, then extended his hand. The honor was mine, Marcus. You've done well. Keep leading, keep teaching. Make sure they remember that service isn't about glory. It's about sacrifice. It's about doing what needs to be done, even when no one's watching, even when no one will ever know. Thomas walked home alone, that slight hitch in his step, the red jacket pulled tight against the night chill. Behind him, Sullivan's bar went dark, but something had changed there. Something fundamental. The next Friday, when Thomas arrived, the big table was empty, waiting. Morrison and his friends were at the bar and they stood when Thomas entered. The old man in the faded jacket walked to his table, sat down slowly. Kyle brought him a beer without being asked, and for the first time in months, Thomas Reed didn't look quite so alone. The weight he carried seemed just a little lighter, because someone had seen him. Really seen him. Not the old man in the worn jacket, but the soldier, the warrior, the man who'd walked through fire and came out the other side asking nothing, expecting nothing, carrying his stories in silence until someone cared enough to listen.